I'd like you to imagine that our boss came up to us one day and said, you know what, we're so happy with these dozens and dozens of Palo Alto firewalls that we have. Is there any way that we can centrally kind of manage all of them as opposed to having to manage every single individual firewall on its own? And the answer is absolutely yes. We can take a wide view, like a panoramic view of all of our firewalls and what they're doing and how they're configured by using a management tool called Panorama. In this nugget, I'd like to just introduce you to the idea of it, give you a few examples of how it can be used so that you have some exposure to this tool called Panorama. Let's begin. Now, it's been scientifically proven that it's pretty tough to work with the Palo Alto firewall using Panorama unless you have a licensed copy of Panorama to use. So the first thing we're going to do is get a serial number from Palo Alto, and then we're going to register that serial number up at the support website. And then once we register the serial number, we can download the .ova and we can install it just like we did the Palo Alto firewalls. In fact, the process feels identical. So we install from the .ova, and then once we have that machine up and running in our virtualized environment, we're going to go to the command line interface. We'll log in as admin with the password of admin, again, just like the firewalls. And then we're going to use device config at the CLI to configure the IP address. And we can also configure right there at the command line interface the DNS information and the default gateway as well, all using the device config command. And that process is exactly the same as it was for the firewalls. And for Panorama, we're going to give it the IP address for management of .224 on our 192.168.1 network. So just as a reminder, we have 222, which is our first and primary firewall. And then we have .223, which is our standby unit. Then we have .224, which is Panorama. And then all we do is simply connect via HTTPS to that IP address. And then what we're going to do is we're going to configure the firewalls to work with Panorama. And we're going to configure Panorama to work with the firewalls. And then once we have that set up, we can centrally manage our firewalls from Panorama, from a single pane of glass, if you will. So now if we want to deploy a new security rule to 15 or 16 different HA pairs of firewalls, we don't have to do it over and over again. We can do it one time in Panorama and simply push those changes to those firewalls. We're currently sitting at our primary firewall, so it's currently active, and there's the IP address of .222. We need to tell this firewall, hey buddy, you're going to be managed and working with Panorama. Please be okay with that. And the way we communicate that over to this firewall is we click on the device tab over here in the top right, and then on the left hand side select setup, and then we're going to go under the management sub tab, and over here on the right we have Panorama settings. We can click the little gear to tell this firewall about the Panorama management server that we want it to communicate with. So our Panorama server that we have is at 192.168.1.224. I'm going to leave all the other defaults in place and click on OK. And then of course we need to commit that, so we'll click on commit and we'll confirm our commit. While that's committing, we'll go ahead and go to our second firewall. And here on the dashboard, we can verify its IP address of .223 and that it's the current passive device in the HA pair. And we're going to do the same treatment for that. We're going to go to the device tab here, and then on the left select setup, and then on the management sub tab with that selected, we'll go over here to the Panorama settings and click on the little gear icon. We'll put in the IP address of our Panorama management server at 192.168.1.224. We'll leave the other defaults in place, click OK, and we'll commit those changes. So now in our firewalls, they are both ready, willing, and able to go ahead and communicate and be managed by the Panorama server. So next, let's go to the Panorama server. Now, at first glance, this may look a little bit like the firewalls, but notice the background here. Up here, we've got this nice different color and some words that say Panorama, which is great, really good indicator. And you'll also notice that the tabs are a little bit different. So we have the dashboard, the application command center, the monitor tab, and we have a Panorama tab. We can also confirm here with the IP address of .224 just to verify we're on the right device. So if we want to add the firewalls so they can be managed by this Panorama server, what we would do is we'd click on the Panorama tab over here on the top right. And with that selected, if we needed to configure details about the management interface, we could do that right here, very similar as how we did on the firewalls. If we needed to configure DNS information, we can click on the Services sub-tab and put that information in right here. And if we go back to management just for a moment, under general settings, we could also edit that. And then this is also where we would put in that serial number. And that's the same serial number that we would have registered with the support website at Palo Alto Networks. Also here on the left under software, we have dynamic updates, and we can click on check now and check for the latest updates and then download them and install them, very similar to what we did on the firewalls. And the cool thing is we can do this here on the Panorama server, and we can push that content to the firewalls that need it. So we don't have to rely on the individual firewalls doing dynamic updates. We can push updates right here from the Panorama server. But I digress. We want to add our firewalls to be managed by this Panorama server. So to do that, with the Panorama tab selected, over on the left, we're going to select Managed Devices. And currently, the Panorama server doesn't know about those two firewalls because it needs to be told about them. So we're going to click on Add here, and we're going to put in the serial numbers of those other two firewalls. So I'm going to go back to the other firewalls for a moment. So here's our primary, go to the dashboard, here's our serial number. I'll scroll down and grab it. So we'll copy that, we'll go back to Panorama, and we'll paste it in. And then we'll press Enter, and we'll go get the serial number for our standby firewall as well. So we'll go to the secondary firewall, go to the dashboard, and here on the left on the dashboard, here's the serial number, so we'll right click on that to copy that, go back to Panorama, and we'll paste that in as well. So there's our two serial numbers for our two devices. And we'll click on OK. Now currently they're disconnected because we need to do a commit. Now in Panorama, when we click on commit, we have more options. One of the options is a commit of Panorama. Think of that like the management system on this server. Another option that we're going to have here in a moment once we create a device group is we can go ahead and commit changes to a device group, which for example could include our primary and our standby Palo Alto firewalls once we put them into a device group. So for now, we're going to use the commit type of Panorama. So we'll click on commit and we'll let that finish. So we'll click on close, and it looks like for the device state that we have one that's connected and one that's not connected, and it may take just a few moments for it to sync up and establish that management connection between the Panorama server and that second firewall. So we'll click on refresh, and sure enough, there we go. And if we scroll over here to the right, it has additional details, including the versions of the antivirus and apps and threats and URL filtering and so forth. So that looks great. Now to manage devices, especially if we have a HA pair, we want to put them into device groups. And a device group is simply a clever and easy way to push configurations to multiple firewalls at the same time. So to create a device group, under the Panorama tab on the left hand side, we'd select device groups and we'll click on add. Let's call this our device group. If we put a check in the checkbox that says group HA peers, it just puts them right next to each other. So we have the active and the standby, and then we can check the checkbox next to them to put them both into this device group. So if we had 10 firewalls and we wanted them all in this device group, we could just add them all in. And then if we have a change, for example, a security policy or a NAT policy that we want to push to all those devices, we can just apply that change to the device group and make sure that all those devices get it. So we'll click on OK. And then we'll go ahead and click on commit, and this will be another Panorama commit. The actual firewalls don't need to know much about which device groups they belong to. That's a Panorama function. So that is done. And then as an example, let's just do a simple push of a configuration that we want to push out to both of these firewalls that are in this device group. So notice here, now that we have device groups created, we have this little subsection called device groups with policies and objects. So if we wanted to create a new security policy, we'd go to policies, and then under security we have pre-rules and post-rules. The pre-rules are going to go at the top of the Palo Alto firewalls who receive this, the top of the rule set. The post-rules are going to be after, or at the bottom, if you will, of the existing rules that are already there. And because rules are processed from top to bottom, if we apply these, for example, as post-rules, we're giving the local firewall control of the rules that happened before that. So as an example, let's select post rules. We'll go ahead and click on add, and let's just create a simple example. Let's call this post rule from Panorama. And for the source, let's just say any. For destination, we'll say any. For the application, we'll say any. Service and URL category, any. Action, and let's go ahead and do a drop. So for example, if we want to have a rule at the end of all our firewalls that said explicitly deny everything else that wasn't earlier permitted, this would do it. And for the target, check this out. We have this new tab called target, and this is where we can say we want to apply this to our device group. So now when we click on OK, and then we click on commit, we're going to commit this twice. We're going to commit it once in Panorama, and then we're going to commit it once to the device group. So we'll click on commit, And that's just so that Panorama in its database of who has what, it's all set up, including that new security rule. And that's done. And now we'll click on commit one more time, and this time we'll specify device group. And then we can also specifically state which device group. And over here we can also preview the changes that are about to be deployed. So if we click on preview changes and click on OK, and if this does not come up for you, by the way, please check for your pop-up blockers, which could stop it from coming up. So here's the new rule that's going to be pushed out. So we'll go ahead and close that window, and we'll do our commit. And now it's pushing out that change to all the devices in the device group, which in our case is our primary and our standby Palo Alto firewalls. So we'll let that continue in the background. We'll click on close. And to verify that that's working, let's do this. Let's go out to one of the firewalls. Let's go out to our primary firewall. So on the dashboard, just confirming where we're at. We're now looking at .222, which is our currently active firewall. And if we go to policies, and on the left-hand side, select security, and we scroll down, check this out. We've got this post rule from Panorama, and it's down here near the bottom because it was implemented as a post rule. So all the existing rules that were on this firewall are still in place, still processed from top to bottom. And currently in position number 11 is the Panorama rule that got pushed to this firewall. In this nugget, we took a little teeny peek at the world of Panorama as a centralized management tool for configuration that can also be used as a log collector. So we can configure it as a central place to collect logs from multiple firewalls as well. And the benefit of having a single point like that is that we have a better overall picture from all of our network devices being correlated. So the data that we can collect is a more holistic approach to what's really happening across all of our firewalls. I'm glad you joined me for this nugget. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.